It started with kindness, then meals, then longing. They crossed a line they swore they never would.
いや、大丈夫ですよ。絶対誤解されますってこれ。
He trusted them both, but beneath that trust was the secret that held them all hostage.
病院行かなくていい？
大丈夫。
What do you do when your heart finally feels alive, but it belongs to the wrong man?
分かったわよ。ジョギング行ってくる。ゆっくりお風呂入ってね。
よいしょ。
全然ダメ。
One woman, two lives, no way out. Have you ever loved someone so much, but still felt completely alone? Pamela did. She had been married for years. To the outside world, her life looked perfect: a cozy home, a hardworking husband, and a routine that never wavered. But behind closed doors, she was slowly disappearing inside. Her husband Mark, once her everything, had changed. Maybe it was gradual. Maybe it was always there, and she hadn't seen it. But now, he was always working, always busy, always tired, and she was just there. Each day started the same. Breakfast made, house cleaned, dinner ready, and yet, not once did he ask how she was. Not once did he look her in the eye with the warmth he used to. What once felt like partnership had become a transaction. The man she had promised forever to no longer saw her. And that kind of loneliness, the kind that exists with someone else, sits the worst kind of all. Pamela tried, she waited, she forgave, she convinced herself he was just stressed, tired, under pressure. But the truth, she wasn't even angry, she was invisible. And then one day, someone saw her. It was a quiet afternoon. She had just stepped outside to water her plants, fighting back tears from another night of silence. That's when Robert, her next-door neighbor, waved from across the fence. He was just taking out the trash. Just another mundane moment, but that small wave, it held something. Something real. Something warm. He didn't flirt. He didn't stare. He just smiled and asked, "Are you okay?" 3 words. That's all it took. And suddenly, everything she had been bottling up for years surged to the surface. She brushed it off at first. "Yeah, I'm fine," she said quickly, avoiding his eyes. But Robert wasn't the type to ignore emotion. He apologized gently if he was overstepping. He told her he didn't mean anything by it. He just noticed she didn't seem herself lately. That was the beginning. At first, it was just small talk, weather, gardening, neighborhood news. But little by little, she opened up. She told him about the silence at home, about how she missed being heard, about the ache of lying next to someone who didn't even notice when she cried. She thought she'd feel ashamed, but instead, she felt relief. Robert didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. He listened. Every time Pamela talked to him, something inside her softened. It wasn't attraction, not at first. It was safety. It was human connection, the kind she hadn't felt in years. There was a warmth in his voice, a kindness in his eyes. And though he never said anything inappropriate, there was something unspoken in their conversations, an understanding, a silent agreement that what they had was rare. One day she told him something she had never even admitted to herself. "I feel like I'm dying in my own home," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And Robert just looked at her with the kind of compassion that didn't need words. He didn't try to fix her. He didn't tee off her cliches or advice. He simply said, "You don't deserve to feel that way." And that was the moment something changed. She started looking forward to seeing him, to those small exchanges over the fence, a shared cup of coffee on the front steps, a smile, a glance that lingered just a second too long, and each time her husband ignored her or brushed her off, Robert's voice would echo in her mind, "You don't deserve to feel that way." Pamela wasn't chasing danger. She wasn't trying to betray anyone. She was just tired of waiting to feel alive again. And with Robert, she finally felt seen. And yet, a part of her was afraid. Afraid of the warmth she was starting to crave. Afraid of what it meant. But most of all, afraid of how easy it was to feel understood by someone who wasn't her husband. Some might say this was the start of an affair, but for Pamela it felt like the beginning of her waking up. They say affairs begin in the mind long before anything physical happens. And for Pamela, that was true. She hadn't planned it. She hadn't even thought it possible. But the more time she spent around Robert, the more she began to feel herself again. Not just as a wife, not just as a woman holding a household together, but as a person with emotions, needs, laughter, opinions, life. It began innocently, as most things do. One rainy afternoon, Mark had called last minute to say he'd be working late again. Pamela had already cooked chicken stew, just like she used to when they were newlyweds. The smell filled the kitchen, but the chair across from her stayed empty, like always. She stood by the window, staring out, and saw Robert on his porch, fiddling with something. Without thinking too much, she waved. He looked up, smiled, and before she could talk herself out of it, she walked over with a Tupperware container. "Thought you might want some? It's too much for one person," she said softly. He grinned. "Only if you eat with me." So they did, sitting side by side under his porch roof as the rain whispered around them. They shared a meal that felt like something sacred. They didn't talk about her husband, or her loneliness, or the years she'd lost, feeling numb. They talked about music, about old dreams, about stupid things they missed from their childhoods. And something shifted. After that night, it became a rhythm. Sometimes, she'd bring over cookies. Sometimes he'd surprise her with tea. He learned how she liked her eggs. She learned the way his mouth tilted when he was thinking deeply. They never crossed the line, but it danced there, teasing them, testing them. Then came the first time he touched her hand. It was nothing, really. A brush of fingers when they both reached for the same dish. But the spark, it was undeniable. She pulled away, embarrassed, heart pounding. He looked at her like she was porcelain, like one wrong move would shatter her. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to." But she stopped him. "I know," she whispered. "I know." From then on, every look between them held a weight. Every laugh was deeper, every silence louder. And still nothing happened. Until it did. It was late. Her husband had left on a business trip. Pamela had been feeling off all day, anxious, restless, like something was about to break. She stood outside, the night air wrapping around her like a secret. Then she saw Robert's porch light turn on. He stepped outside with a blanket, sipping something warm. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "Me neither." He didn't ask her to come in. She didn't need an invitation. Moments later, they were inside, sitting side by side on his couch. A movie played, but neither of them was really watching. Their shoulders touched, her breath hitched. She looked at him and he looked back. And that's when he kissed her. It wasn't wild, it wasn't rushed, it was slow, aching. like a dam finally breaking. She melted into it, let herself feel it, let herself be for the first time in years. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from finally being touched like she mattered. The next morning, guilt came, heavy, suffocating. She told herself it was a mistake, that it couldn't happen again. But the lie tasted bitter, because deep down, she didn't regret it. Not the way he touched her, not the way he made her feel. She only regretted that it had taken her this long to feel it again. From that moment, their connection only grew stronger. They became careful, strategic, never too close in public. But behind the curtain, their affection deepened. Conversations turned to longing. Smiles turned into hours, stolen in the quiet of night. And one day, it almost all came crashing down. She was in Robert's kitchen, helping him unpack groceries. They were laughing, truly laughing, when the front door opened. Pamela froze. Mark's voice echoed, "Robert?" He was early. In a split second, Pamela slipped out the back door and dashed through the yard to her own house. Her heart pounded in her ears as she threw herself onto her couch, grabbing a book to look casual, pretending she hadn't just been across the fence committing emotional treason. Later that night, Mark didn't suspect a thing. He barely looked at her, just like always. She lay in bed, eyes wide open, realizing how close she had come to being caught, and yet, part of her didn't feel fear. Part of her felt more alive than ever. She tried. Pamela tried to pull away from Robert. After that near disaster, she told herself it had to stop, that it was too dangerous, too wrong, too real. She looked at her wedding ring like it was supposed to anchor her again. But what do you do when your anchor is the very thing drowning you? One night, her husband came home earlier than usual. She took it as a sign she had made his favorite dinner, lit candles, put on a soft dress he used to compliment. She wanted to try, one last time. As he walked through the door, she smiled. "I made that roast you love," she said gently. He barely looked up from his phone. "I already ate." She paused, then forced another smile. "Maybe we could talk tonight. Just you and me, Pamela." He sighed, already walking past her. "It's been a long day, can we not?" Her hands clenched as she stared at the meal getting cold on the table. He disappeared into the bedroom, leaving behind nothing but silence and a woman barely holding herself together. That night, she didn't cry. She walked out the door and crossed the lawn without thinking. It was automatic now, like breathing. Robert opened the door before she even knocked. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He just stepped aside and let her in. She fell into his arms, not because she needed passion, but because she needed presence. She needed someone to see her, to listen, to say, "I'm here." And Robert did. That night, they didn't speak about her husband, or what they were doing, or where it was heading. They just existed together. Two lost people finding warmth in the middle of cold. From then on, every time Mark shut her out, Pamela drifted into Robert's world. It wasn't planned, it wasn't glamorous. It was raw, messy, and full of guilt. But it was real. She started sleeping over when Mark traveled, justifying it to herself like he wouldn't notice anyway. And the truth was, he didn't. Some nights, she would come home late, quietly unlock the front door, walk past the living room, and find Mark asleep on the couch with his laptop open. He never asked where she had been. Sometimes, she wished he would, just to prove he still cared. But he didn't. He never did. And that's how the affair bloomed, not in lust, but in the cracks of a dying marriage. Robert didn't try to claim her. He didn't push. He knew she was still tethered to something she hadn't fully let go of yet. But when she came to him, he was always there. And sometimes, that was enough. Their love wasn't picture perfect. It was stolen glances through curtains, half hugs, masked as casual hellos when others were around. whispered conversations under starlight, a war between what they felt and what they should feel. But the heart doesn't care about rules. It doesn't care about rings or promises made in another lifetime. It only knows what makes it beat again. Pamela began to notice the double life she was leading. In the morning, she was the perfect wife, making coffee, folding laundry, attending dinners with Mark's colleagues, smiling through every photo. But inside, she belonged somewhere else. And Robert, he had learned to play his role too. To Mark, he was the friendly neighbor, the helpful guy who mowed his lawn when he was away, the man who always waved from across the street. They had even had beers together once. Pamela had watched them from her window, a sick twist of irony curling in her chest. Two men sharing a drink, one blind, the other pretending. How had her life become this? A lie? Or was the lie her marriage? She didn't know anymore. All she knew was this. Every time she left Robert's arms and walked back into her house, it felt like stepping into a grave. And yet, she kept doing it, not because she wanted to, but because it was easier than facing the storm that would come if the truth ever slipped. So they kept the performance going. Pamela, the devoted wife, Robert, the innocent neighbor, Mark, the absent husband, oblivious to the hurricane circling right inside his own home. And as weeks turned into months, and stolen moments turned into patterns, Pamela stopped asking herself if it was right or wrong. She only asked, is this who I am now? Some stories don't end, they just keep playing. That's how it was for Pamela and Robert. Day by day, week by week, the lines blurred, not just between right and wrong, but between who they were pretending to be and who they had become. To the outside world, nothing had changed. Pamela still kissed her husband goodbye in the morning, packed his lunches, attended his office parties with a painted-on smile. Neighbors complimented her garden. Her mother still called her a devoted wife. And Mark, he never suspected a thing. Because Pamela was flawless in her performance. But that's what it had become, a performance. Every conversation, every touch, every glance exchanged in that house was carefully choreographed. A scene from a marriage that no longer lived, only existed. And Robert, he played his role just as perfectly. He'd wave at Mark from across the street, help him fix the fence, offered to collect his mail when he was away. Always friendly, always helpful, never too close, never suspicious. But when Pamela came over, when she knocked twice, then paused, then knocked once more, it was like stepping into another world. A world where she could exhale, where she could be soft again, where no one demanded her to be strong or silent or someone else. She didn't live with Robert, but she lived with him. Inside the stolen hours, between the breaths they held when a car passed too slowly, in the silence between their kisses full of questions neither of them dared to ask. Like, what are we doing? Where is this going? Is this love or escape? But questions like that had no place in the world they had built, because to ask would be to break it, and what they had was too fragile to carry truth. Pamela often lay awake at night, next to Mark's sleeping body, staring at the ceiling, wondering, what happens if we get caught? What if one day I don't come back from Robert's house? What if Mark finally sees me and it's too late? But those questions never left her lips. Because this wasn't about being found out. It was about not being found. It was about continuing the only part of her life that still felt alive, that still made her heart race, that reminded her she wasn't just somebody's wife, she was herself. She told herself she'd stop, next week, next month, after the next fight. But the truth, she didn't want to stop, because as painful and messy and terrifying as it all was, it felt better than being numb. And Robert never pressured her, never asked her to leave her husband, never gave ultimatums. He was just there, solid, quiet, patient, and maybe that's what hurt the most. That the man she had betrayed her vows with treated her with more tenderness than the man she had once promised her life to. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just lust. It was intimacy. Real, undeniable, and impossible. So they lived in their bubble, behind closed doors, between stolen glances, and the shadows of a suburban lie. Sometimes, Pamela would watch herself in the mirror, her reflection split between two lives, and she'd wonder, am I the villain or the victim? But life doesn't always give you those answers. Sometimes, it just hands you choices and watches what you do with them. And Pamela, she chose to keep the story going. She and Robert became masters of disguise, laughing politely at neighborhood barbecues, standing far enough apart in photos, acting like they were nothing more than good friends. And Mark, he never looked deep enough to notice. Or maybe he didn't want to. Maybe he was acting too. Maybe the whole marriage had become one long unspoken agreement. You don't ask questions. I won't tell lies. And we both pretend this is enough. And so, the movie played on. A beautiful wife, a kind neighbor, a husband too busy to see the fire burning just beneath his roof. No one yelled, no one confessed, no one ended anything. Because sometimes the greatest betrayals aren't loud. They're quiet, polished, invisible. And in that silence, Pamela kept walking the tightrope between two worlds, never fully in either, never truly out of either. And that's where we leave her. Not because her story is over, but because some stories never get closure. They just keep going. If this story stirred something in you, share your thoughts below. Have you ever been caught between duty and desire? Between the life you chose and the one that chose you? We're listening. And maybe someone else out there needs to hear your story too.